Hi there, I'm John Hope, Senior Technology Evangelist at Sophos.
Hi there, I'm David Poulton. I'm the COO of Intelligent Systems Limited.
So David, thank you for inviting me to have a chat with you.
So, good to be here, John. One of the first things I would like to know about is what's the threat landscape like these days?
Okay, so we're observing some really significant changes in the threat landscape, really down to the way that cybercrime has become somewhat industrialized. So we're seeing significant changes because the vast majority of ransomware is delivered by one of a very small number of highly organized cybercrime gangs. And what that means in practical terms is that the barrier of entry to cybercrime has become much lower. So whereas traditionally attacks like ransomware were normally orientated towards enterprise organizations, what we're actually seeing is because the cost of mounting an attack is reducing, cybercriminals are actually now actively going after smaller organizations as well. And this presents quite a significant challenge because, of course, smaller organizations don't typically have access to the very best cybersecurity tools, access to the appropriate amount of personnel. And that's coupled with the fact that most attacks these days, at least the successful ones, are actually launched by humans. So traditionally, you would have gone out and you'd have bought things like antivirus or endpoint protection, and that would have been enough on its own. But because most cybercrime these days is perpetuated by a human, then the net result is that in order to really successfully block these attacks, you can't rely on technology on its own. That's the kind of fundamental change that's occurred. Particularly because humans are very good at problem solving. And essentially, if you give a cyber criminal long enough, they will get into pretty much any organization. It's just a matter of time. And they also use some really clever techniques these days to avoid capture by traditional endpoint protection technologies. So, for example, you'll see a lot of cases where the cyber criminals are exploiting vulnerabilities where organizations have not patched successfully, they've not updated software, they're running legacy systems, all of which invite attacks. And then once they get into the organization, they won't be bringing their own malware to the party. They won't be bringing their own viruses. What they'll do instead is they'll use legitimate IT tools against organizations. So we see the exploitation of tools like remote desktop protocols. Any kind of remote access tool is really useful for the cyber criminals. And then they will use tools like PowerShell to actually execute the malicious actions they're trying to achieve. And the real challenge here for organizations is that technology on its own can't really distinguish the difference between the use of these tools legitimately versus being used in a malicious way. And organizations, they can't turn off things like RDP or like PowerShell because these are somewhat intrinsic to the operation of the organization. So it becomes this real challenge. And now the cyber criminals really operate in this gray area where technology can't actively determine whether something is legitimate or if it's malicious in nature. And probably the most recent significant change has been a shift towards attacks that are using identity against organizations. So rather than the cyber criminals actually hacking and breaking into organizations, they're actually logging in these days. And what they're doing is they're socially engineering victims out of their usernames, their passwords, or directing them to malicious sites so they can scrape the login authentication tokens. And then they're using those credentials against the organization. And of course, this again comes back to the same problem. How could you expect technology to understand the difference between a user logging in legitimately versus that user's credentials being then compromised and those details being used against the organization? And these are really difficult things. And this is why humans are really important now, because they can make those decisions, they can contextualize in a way that, as it stands today, technology can't really do on its own.
Yeah, and there's and then are they using AI as well more extensively these days?
It's probably not as big as the media would suggest. But one of the significant changes that has occurred with AI very quickly has been the use of artificial intelligence for the purposes of social engineering. As I already mentioned, the cyber criminals, generally speaking, are starting to go after the humans because technology can protect so much, but humans, they can't be patched. You can't update your human. And we are all ultimately emotional beings at heart. So if you give somebody the right incentive or you threaten them with the appropriate action, then users will do all sorts of crazy things like give away their usernames and passwords. And it's very difficult to stop.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that cyber criminals use artificial intelligence really effectively is to create phishing emails and other ways of socially engineering victims. In the old days, we used to tell people if you see messages that are badly spelled, badly punctuated, broken English, these were all pretty good indicators that what you had on your hands was something that was malicious. But because of artificial intelligence, the cyber criminals can very quickly become fluent in any language they care to mention. Let's be candid, most cyber criminals are not native English speakers, but AI just masks the fact that they're not communicating in their native language. But it goes deeper than that, because they can start to replicate things like brand imagery, brand tone of voice, and it becomes really difficult then for potential victims to work out whether this is a scam or whether it's something that's legitimate. I think it's really important that we don't ever look at people who fall for these things as being stupid, because AI has really changed to make it very, very convincing. And that's backed up by the fact then that the cyber criminals will also do research on their victims. So they'll work out from a geographic point of view, where are they located? It's never going to land if you talk to somebody in Glasgow about their Oyster card renewal in London, because it doesn't fit. But the criminals will work out, well, where is the organisation? Who are their suppliers? They might even get into your emails and replicate the tone of voice, the language that people might use, so that when one of these scams does arrive, it's really, really convincing.